I choose to Japada instead of dying abroad. Racism, loneliness and depression, bills and taxes, racism, jobs where you're on your feet for 10 hours, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. I don't think that list would be complete without mentioning racism. The people who are saying, oh, come abroad, it is so rosy here. You can make so much money. Regardless of how good it can be here, home is still best. You're going to be working very long hours and have no time for yourself. You will never feel like you belong here. Hey everybody, I am here to talk about Japada, the Japada movement. I have been seeing a lot of such videos recently and YouTube has just gone crazy. The algorithm keeps recommending such videos to me and I think I know what went wrong. I made the mistake of clicking on one or two of those videos and so YouTube just decides, oh, she loves that kind of pie. Let's keep serving it to her. YouTube, I am tired. I don't want to do Japada videos anymore. Yes, this is going to be a reaction video. For those of you who are not Nigerian, let me define terms so that you're not too lost. Japada means return. But for you to understand Japada properly, we have to backtrack a little and talk about Japa. Japa means escape. It's a Nigerian word and that's the literal meaning of it. However, it is used as a light-hearted reference to a social phenomenon happening in Nigeria now where people are emigrating out of the country in their numbers. Okay, I'm talking in large numbers. There's a mass immigration going on in Nigeria right now. And I would say that the Japa movement actually took off really seriously within the past 5 to 7 years. That's my estimation, okay? So that is Japa. Japada, on the other hand, is the opposite of Japa. Japada means return. And this is a movement that is growing as well, and it's a reference to people who previously left Nigeria, but now, for whatever reason, they want to return to Nigeria.
But long story short, the reason is because I'm not happy. Long story short.
We left home for greener pastures, but was it really worth it? We work twice as hard every day, but it just doesn't seem like it's enough. The economy is not looking good. Every day it keeps getting worse and worse. And immigration policies is being tightening up every day. And it is just not favorable for migrants.
I know your abroad is hard, and that's why we are saying that once you have gotten what you are looking for, seek rest. Some people cannot even rest. Some people cannot even rest, like they walk around the clock. That's why you hear people, dropping here, dropping there. Some people cannot even rest.
The first reason that comes to mind is that for these people, living abroad just did not work out for them. Maybe because they did not have their legal papers to stay and because of all the immigration trouble happening everywhere.
One of the most recent videos that I saw was one from a lady called Edith, I believe. Her YouTube channel is Eddie's Corner. And the particular video that I saw was one that was titled, I choose to Japada instead of dying abroad, something along those lines.
You don't feel yourself living, you're kind of depressed, or you want to leave that present state. And the thought of what people would think is making you stay in that present situation. I want to tell you that nobody really cares about you.
That was the title that grabbed me in the first place. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty serious. That sounds pretty heavy. And as Edith pointed out in her video, sometimes the plan to return back to Nigeria when it is shared online is met with a lot of criticism, trolling, bullying even. And I don't know why that is the case. I am going to be reacting to some of those reasons why people Japada, or the reasons that they give for wanting to return back to Nigeria. Yes, I am talking specifically from the perspective of moving from Nigeria to another country, usually a Western country, or moving back from a Western country to Nigeria, because I live in Australia myself and I relocated from Nigeria. And I know that some of the things I say in this video still apply regardless of where you're from. So you must not necessarily be from Nigeria, okay? But I am just saying that I am narrowing it down to a perspective that I am most familiar with. So what are some of those reasons? Some of the reasons are loneliness and depression, bills and taxes, the weather, working conditions, childcare related issues, racism. Racism is a big one, obviously. I don't think that list would be complete without mentioning racism. And then it might be things like language barriers and also challenges fitting into or even understanding the Western value system. Just to go a little further into why some of these factors I have mentioned have become a big deal for these people. For instance, if we talk about loneliness and depression, it is really hard. Relocation is hard, okay? You're leaving everything that is familiar, leaving your support system behind, leaving a place where for many people you can very freely express your values to a place where the expression of those values becomes limited. So yes, loneliness is a big deal, and loneliness is just a precursor sometimes to depression. So many new immigrants would face that sort of challenge. In relation to things like the weather is a big one. The weather was one of those big considerations for us in deciding to move to Australia, okay? Coming from Nigeria, which is your tropical climate, to go to a place where the climate is more temperate requires a big adjustment, and sometimes people don't think this through properly. There are people who are moving from Nigeria to countries where there are more cold days throughout the year than there are warm days. I don't know if you've heard about SAD, okay? Seasonal affective disorder. This is a condition that some people are affected with when the weather changes, whether the weather becomes too hot to what they are used to or too cold to what they are used to. But most people experience it in relation to moving into a much colder climate than what they are used to. Then another big thing that I see people talk about a lot is working conditions. And this is where sometimes, as I mentioned previously, the way we talk about some of these challenges has the unintended consequence. I say unintended because I don't think anybody sets out with the intention to create an erroneous impression of their experience, okay? It is just people sharing their experience, but sometimes these personal accounts of our experiences tend to create a narrative that might not be completely accurate. So when it comes to working conditions, I see a lot of videos that talk about how you have to be working back to back abroad to make ends meet, jobs where you're on your feet for 10 hours, 12, 14, 16 hours a day. And some people have to finish from such a long shift and hop into another one. So the erroneous impression that I think it is creating is it is fostering this view that for you to be able to live a reasonably comfortable life abroad, then you have to be working such long hours. You have to be on your feet for that long, or to be in a job that requires a lot of manual handling, or it is physically demanding, or you're in the care service, or you're driving a taxi, all those either low skilled jobs or menial jobs. Yeah, I am not saying that there is anything wrong with these jobs, don't get me wrong. I am talking about the impression that some of these narratives unintentionally create. And I am here to tell you that that is not the case. And then, they've talked about the bills, the cycle of bills here.
It's 980 pounds. That is just the bills that I need to be paying every month, apart from eating, apart from buying clothes for my kids, apart from rent.
It does take a bit of getting used to when you first arrive in a Western country, because I know that many Western countries operate the same way when it comes to bills and paying of taxes. Suddenly you're in a place where the bills are on such a shorter cycle. Back home in Nigeria, we pay rent yearly. I have heard that in the UK, rent is paid monthly. Here in Australia, rent is paid weekly, or at least it is calculated weekly. You can pay monthly if you like, but your rent is calculated weekly. And it just means that many people pay their rents weekly as well. So you're in this environment where there are so many bills to pay, bills that you've probably never paid in your life. Suddenly you have to pay those bills, and you have to be on time with your bills. Otherwise, there are consequences. And sometimes those consequences can be as severe as you facing the prospect of homelessness if you don't pay your rent, or facing the prospect of your utilities cut off. Okay, and how are you going to survive winter without hot water? How are you going to survive winter without electricity? So there are more significant consequences when you don't pay your bills abroad. If you don't pay your car registration or your car insurance, then your car could get impounded, or you might get a license suspension. So all these things are big issues. So we're talking about all of that, and then there are child-related concerns as well, whether it be in relation to the cost of childcare, the availability of childcare, or it could be other things to do with child welfare concerns. Incidentally, there are people who have been open enough online to share unfortunate experiences with child protection services or child welfare services knocking on their door because something has been identified as a risk factor for their children, and then the government has swooped in. In some cases, children have even been removed from their parents' care as a result of these concerns. Sometimes, newly arrived migrants are not sufficiently prepared for how the system works in relation to child welfare. And even though it is not entirely a case of children being abused or neglected, it might just be because the culture operates differently. For instance, back in Nigeria, it is quite common to leave your 14-year-old in charge of their younger siblings. That is not something you can do here. Okay, that is not something you can do in most Western countries. Otherwise, you will be slapped with charges of child neglect, okay, or child abuse. All right, so sometimes it's just a cultural misunderstanding, I would say, or a difference in culture, but then it leads into experiences where people are having to defend themselves against the law. And then Western values. This is another one that people struggle with. The fact that many Western countries are progressive and liberal, and then if you're coming from Nigeria in particular, it is a much more conservative society. I have seen parents who have expressed concerns about raising their kids in Western cultures because maybe there are certain aspects of Western values that are at odds with their own traditional cultural values from wherever they've come from. And for some parents, it is enough for them to decide, no, they are going back. They are packing up the family and going back home. What do I have to say in relation to some of these things? This video will benefit even more people who are still desiring to relocate, but they don't know what to do with these extreme narratives. The people who are saying, oh, come abroad, it is so rosy here. The system works. You're never going to be owed a salary, and so you can make so much money. You can become rich. You can build that mansion. You can buy that car. You can start that project. You can support your entire family members back home just off of what you make abroad. So there is that narrative, and then there's the narrative of please don't come. Regardless of how good it can be here, home is still best. You will never feel like you belong here. You're going to be working very long hours and have no time for yourself. You're going to have to deal with cold weather throughout the year, working at a job where you're required to stand 16 hours a day, language barriers, all those reasons like I have just mentioned. So what do you do if you're someone who is willing to relocate and you're faced with these very extreme views and you don't know what to do? This is what I am going to say to you in reaction to both the Japa and the Japada narratives. But let's say I am focusing more on the Japada narratives. The first thing I am going to say is please listen to those Japada videos. However many of them you can find or access, listen to them and take them very seriously. Otherwise, it might be you in no distant time setting a camera in front of your face and telling the world how you regret relocating. Okay, so watch those videos because the points that they raise are valid. These are things you must prepare for. Even if you cannot physically prepare, put in your list of things to expect, experiences to expect, be mentally prepared for them, have some kind of strategy. Okay, when people talk about the weather, talk about those jobs that require them to be on their feet for so long, listen and learn. The second thing I would say is that the country you move to matters a lot, and off the back of that would be the visa that brings you into that country. Different visas have different conditions, but also those conditions would differ from country to country. Let me give you an example. Here in Australia, on a student visa, the kind of restrictions you would have on your visa, the kind of conditions that apply on your visa would depend on the qualification you're studying towards. Okay, if you're studying towards a bachelor degree on a student visa and you come in here with dependent family members, which might be your spouse and then school-age children, did you know that your children will also have to pay international fees here in Australia? Now, I do know from videos I have seen online that it is probably not the case in the UK. In the UK, school-age children can access public education for free. That is not the case here in Australia if you are on a student visa and you're studying towards a bachelor degree. Also, the restrictions on work hours that apply to you as the primary visa holder will also apply to your spouse who is your dependent on the same student visa, just because you're studying towards a bachelor degree. If on the other hand you're studying towards a master degree, the limitations on how many hours you can work will only apply to you, the visa holder, but your dependents can work full-time, and so on and so forth. Okay, the higher up you go in terms of the qualifications, the more relaxed the conditions on your visa will be, possibly the things that you can access. I feel like there is also the impression that all Western countries are the same. While there might be huge commonalities across these Western countries, there are still variations. And may I just say that some of these variations, even if they don't appear apparent from the very beginning, might be significant enough to alter your experience. And this also goes into the conversation around working conditions. Countries are different. Another side of that argument would be people's intentions for wanting to relocate in the first place. I know that on face value, it appears as though we all are leaving Nigeria because we want a better life for ourselves, we want better opportunities. However, when you drill down to ask people what they actually mean by better opportunities, you will get different answers. For some people, a better opportunity just means being at a job, any kind of job where they will not be owed a salary. For some other people, it's about climbing the career ladder, opportunities that will allow them to grow professionally, gain a lot of experience. These are all people seeking better opportunities, but the definition of a better opportunity will differ from person to person. You should question, is it the case that you're not able to live a good life, afford your daily expenses, be able to save, do all the things that you would like to be able to do just by working a regular 9 to 5? Is that the case? Is it the case that if you lived abroad, then you must work under very unfriendly conditions just to make ends meet? And my answer here is no, that is not the case. I'm going to use myself as an example. I work a job where I am only required to be there 7 hours a day. It's a regular 9 to 5, but I only do 7 hours. Okay, I don't work on the weekends, I don't work nights, I don't work public holidays. I have access to sick leave, paid sick leave. I have access to annual leave, and the organization, or should I say the sector I happen to work in, even offers concessional days off, can pay all of my bills, have some savings, and still be able to do other things. So when you see people working back to back, working 16 hours, 12 hours, 10 hours a day, there is some other goal they are trying to achieve. Keeping in mind that many people who relocate out of Nigeria are supporting entire families back home. And I am talking not just immediate family, but extended family in many cases. Some of them have projects that they want to start back home. That might be the case for them, and it might not be the case for everybody else. What I am saying here is that it is not a requirement for you to work that way. Also, on that note, listen, there's so many things I can say under this particular point about working conditions. Another thing I was going to say is sometimes people get trapped because they did not do proper forward planning. There are people who, even though they would like to progress their career, they fall into the trap of becoming too comfortable at a survival job. And then as the years go by, it becomes harder and harder to pull themselves out of it and do the necessary things to get back on their career ladder. If you're going to come here and you know that you want to progress your career, let it be top priority for anything you do to be aligned with that goal. All right, survival jobs offer a low barrier of entry. So you get into this survival job, don't get too comfortable. Yes, it might offer you that flexibility. The pay might be halfway decent, you know, to the point where just because you're able to meet your bills, you feel like, okay, what's the use? Why do I have to push myself any further? And then gradually your dreams begin to die without you even knowing that they are dying. And every time you think about the prospect of pulling yourself out to go back and reskill yourself or upskill yourself, retrain, take that exam, do that certification, it starts feeling very daunting. And before you know it, several years have passed, you're stuck at this job. Many of these people will then talk to you about their regrets after several years, and they'll tell you, this is not the life that I envisioned for myself when I first thought about relocating. So don't get too comfortable in a place you know you will not be too happy to still be in several years down the track. Another thing I'm going to say here is be patient. It does take a while for you to settle in properly. So I have heard and also read in several places that it does take upwards of 5 to 7 years for you to feel reasonably settled in your new home. This also goes hand in hand with having reasonable expectations. So if you're the kind of person who is thinking, oh, as soon as I come in, I'm going to be making basket loads of money within the first 2 years, or you're going by all those YouTube videos you see of people who land in a country today and by 6 months time they've already bought their first property. Remember, it's a mortgage. I hope you know it's a mortgage. But even if you're going by that, all right, I don't think that's a reasonable expectation to have of yourself. Do not put yourself under unnecessary pressure because of some of the things that you see online. I expect you to be more sensible than that. Okay, so give yourself time. The difference between having reasonable expectations versus not having reasonable expectations is that you are aware that there's a process and you accept it as part of the experience. Whereas if you didn't have those expectations in the beginning, or you didn't have reasonable expectations, you're going to feel like you're falling behind. You're going to be tougher on yourself. And you know how it is. As soon as you get into that mental space where you feel like this was not worth it at all, somehow your behaviors begin to align with your thoughts. Suddenly you don't see any joy in getting up every day and pushing yourself even harder. At some point you start thinking, what's the point of all of this? Let me just pack my bags and go back home. So be patient. Know that it's a process and be kind to yourself. And then the very last thing I am going to say is I want you to audit your personality. Like sit down and really think about the kind of person that you are, because it plays a big role here. Pay attention to the kind of personality you have. What will it mean for you to be away from your networks? What will it mean for you to be in a place where you are physically alone for long periods of time? There are certain personality types that have more vulnerabilities to feeling lonely and thereby depressed, okay? Also, what's your personality type in relation to how you respond to change? Some people are very resistant to change. They don't want to have to push themselves to learn anything new, to immerse themselves in new experiences. You know, there are people who will never try a new kind of food. They would never try to make friends out of their cultural group. So be very honest with yourself. What kind of personality do you have? The whole essence of relocating to a different country is to engage with change. There are going to be many changes. So if you're someone who is not very good at rolling with the punches, it is very likely that you will regret moving abroad, because you're going to a new system where you have to learn everything afresh, and having a resistant mindset to that will only make you miserable. There are many people for whom relocating abroad will just not feel right. Not because things are not going well. Their lives are reasonably comfortable, but they just don't feel a sense of belonging to their new environment. And it might have something to do with their personality. It might have something to do with their values. Do your research. Like, let your research be so fine-tuned. It should be chiseled. Okay? And the one last thing I am going to say is do that research before you leave. Please do not fall into the trap of we will figure it out when we get there. My dear sister, my dear brother, you're not going to be figuring anything out when you arrive you will be in survival mode. Now that you have the time, you're still in your home country, think about it carefully. Don't forget to leave your comments in the comment section if there's anything I left out of this video, anything that is important for people to know, whether in relation to Japaying or Japadaing. Please let me know in the comment section. I'll be there. Okay? I'll see you again in my next one. Bye-bye.